Hi.
Hello again. In the prior segment on where can wisdom be found in the Bible, dealing with Proverbs, we made the point that we wanted to discuss in more detail competence, and asked the very pointed question, are Jehovah's Witnesses competent to preach and to teach? And we alluded to a seeming conflict between two fairly famous texts in the New Testament, Hebrews 5:12 to 14, and James chapter 3 verses 1 and 2. So we'll read those texts first and then discuss the implications of these very explicit warnings in the New Testament.
Okay. Hebrews. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age.
That is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil.
Sorry.
It's all right. And James chapter 3 verses 1 and 2.
Okay. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body.
Well, is there a conflict or a contradiction here? One says, you ought to be teachers, and the other one says, not many of you should be teachers. Become teachers. And I suppose the reason this jumps to mind when you're thinking of Jehovah's Witnesses, you realize the reason given for not being teachers in James 3, that is, we all stumble in word, and therefore there should be minimal qualifications to public teaching, is, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, in conflict, of course, with the fact that you know, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, that for any length of time, that you're spoon-fed, and the diet you have habitually for decades is milk.
And everyone has the same diet.
Yeah. So, do Jehovah's Witnesses ever get beyond the milk of the Word? And I think we both realized at two different points in our married history that we didn't really qualify. I remember we've done another video on this in the Genesis series, the very first one of the Genesis videos we did a few months back. We told our story of how I resigned as an elder because it became evident to me in the mid-1980s, because of Bible studies and specific issues that were being brought to our attention, that I didn't really know my stuff well enough. And it bothered me for a couple of years, and then finally I decided I had to resign. And as I thought about it more, I realized it's not just my problem. I'm the school overseer. I'm a missionary, that is a pioneer. And here I am thinking I don't know enough because of the questions that are being thrown at me and my inability to deal with them.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking.
You were a troubleshooter.
I was the troubleshooter in the congregation. So I look around and see the other elders and their level of competence and literacy, and I realize most of them are under me. And then I look around and see my fellow pioneers, the same holds for them, if not more so. And then I look at the circuit overseers and district overseers and even the Bethel overseers, Bethel elders, and the circuit overseers and the district overseers, and you see this phenomenon of the plateau.
That's right. Everyone, because you're all fed the exact same material, and you're expected to read the same material, and nobody's given advanced, it's everybody at the same level. So then you realize there isn't going to be
Depth.
Yeah, there isn't going to be a higher maturity, because we're all reading. If you keep up with the literature, you're thought to be ready and willing. And if everyone else knows exactly what you have, you're conned into thinking you know your stuff.
So how does this bubble sustain itself? You're in this bubble, some of us for decades, where you think you know better than those guys out there.
Yeah.
Well, you do most of the time. When you're talking to people at the door or in any public situation, you do.
Who are likely uneducated themselves and oftentimes biblically illiterate, because you're not meeting trained ministers usually, and you're not
Not
having
knocking on
conversations
seminary doors.
with these people. So you're going to feel pretty confident about what you know and they don't know.
The only reason my bubble popped in 1985, 86 is because I already had books from Christendom written by ministers or even bishops, but written by Greek scholars, Hebrew scholars, archaeologists, all of whom had some affiliation with the churches of Christendom, and they knew more than I did, that's for sure.
Yeah.
A lot more than I did. So how did Jehovah's Witnesses combine these two thoughts? We all stumble many times in many things, and therefore we shouldn't think of ourselves as teachers, and then you need to be teachers. But because we have no standard of comparison when we're in the Watchtower, we go on sometimes, even most of our lives, thinking that somehow we're qualified, competent to teach.
I mean, some people have complained about the literature all sounding the same, and I must admit I did complain about that, because there was no flavor of personality in anything. Everything sounded like it was the same writer. You know, and it was done by design that way. So, you know, you do have little hints along the way that something's wrong here, but you don't seem to catch on fast enough. I think for me, my stumbling up was when I was challenged. And you're not challenged at the door that often, or at least it's few and far between, so you can get over it and start feeling confident again. But when David challenged me to show him scriptures from the New Testament with the early Christians preaching paradise, I didn't think I'd have a problem with that. And that was the challenge that made me realize I don't know what I'm talking about. I gotta shut up.
Shut up and still go door to door.
door to door and let the other person talk. But I didn't feel I could talk anymore.
I think in the next segment we should talk about another application of James 3 verse 2, namely that we all stumble in many things. If someone doesn't stumble in word, he's a perfect man. Well, we don't claim, if we're Jehovah's Witnesses, to be perfect men. We know we will stumble in word, but what we don't know is that the Watchtower has been making us stumble for decades and decades and even 4 generations. When I left, it was 4 generations, and now it's 5. Is there any accountability for that? Well, the way James reasons, there is. James reasons
Stricter
that
judgment.
you get stricter judgment. You don't get points from God for volunteering, saying, "Here I am, send me," if you're not qualified.
Yeah.
So in the next segment, we want to talk about where we get that identity text from. "Here I am, send me." Where's that from? It's from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. And yet, as you saw, if you watch one of our videos from last week on Isaiah 6, we didn't talk about the text, but we did put it in the description. The Watchtower, according to its own history, went forth saying, "Here I am, send me," in 1919, and Jesus somehow approved of that. Yet they went forth, as plainly see, even from their own confessions, if you read the history carefully, they went forth with unclean lips. So we want to look more closely at Isaiah chapter 6 to see the background of the famous identity text from which Jehovah's Witnesses draw so much encouragement. "Here I am, send me." In the next segment, Isaiah 6.